Hello and welcome to pjnet.tv. In this video segment is my perspective and comments. And before we get started, I'd like to go back to something that we had discussed last week regarding preparation in case of an emergency or an illness where the community in the region or in the town wants everyone to stay put and hunker down in your own homes. Would you be able to go 2 weeks without leaving your home, and the things that would be necessary for that to happen? But so there were some areas that basically health-wise issues 101, discussing some things that are important to keep us healthy. You might call this mini segment pjnet.tv service announcement, public service announcement for your for you to be aware of, and that it would be helpful to you. Number one, and very important when it comes to if you're out in public around people, to just basics here, folks. Washing your hands with soap and water. You don't need those antibiotic solutions. Just a basic soap and water will do quite fine. Also, when you're burning the candle at both ends, putting a lot of hours at work, what does that do? It lowers your resistance. So colds, flu, the influenza. And what is the influenza? The common strain of flu. But when your body resistance is low, you're susceptible to getting the common cold or influenza flu. So keep that in mind to get your rest, get enough sleep for you to be able to resist those germs that are out there. Also, vitamin C. Orange juice is always great. Grape juice, just things that are high in vitamin C. And as we've heard before, the old saying that goes, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. So just those areas right there can be helpful to keep you healthy, especially in the winter time when influenza and the common cold is rampant during the winter months. So something for you to keep in mind. Now, I don't know if you heard Wednesday that they had to rush Michael Bloomberg to the Nevada hospital. I guess he was suffering with contusions, a split lip, both nostrils were bleeding from a broken nose, and both his eyes were blackened. And from what I understand, Elizabeth Warren, at the end of that debate on Wednesday, delivered a swift kick to Michael Bloomberg's groin. So something else on that debate stage. But all seriousness, folks, Michael Bloomberg took a beating on that Democratic debate. I mean, they threw those that were on that debate stage threw everything at Michael Bloomberg, including the kitchen sink. And he was like a deer in the headlights. No real answers. I think he had one line in the night that told something, but a tragic night for Mayor Bloomberg. They ganged up on him, and I'll tell you, folks, the main gangster on Wednesday night was Elizabeth Warren. She came at him at every direction. Non-disclosure agreements that Michael Bloomberg had with some of his employees. Stop and frisk was another avenue that Elizabeth Warren came at him with a vengeance. And all the debaters really hit him on those areas. But who was on the debate stage? Yes, we had Michael Bloomberg. This was his first appearance from announcing that he was going to parachute in with his billions and to take on that Democratic field. But it was Michael Bloomberg. We had Elizabeth Warren next. We had Bernie Sanders on stage. We had Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, and Amy Klobuchar. And did I forget Joe Biden? No, we don't want to forget old Joe, Uncle Joe, and he was on stage along with them. So that was the cast, and folks, so glad that Steyer was out of the mix this time around. And again, I wonder why he's still running and still has his hat in the ring. But what I like to first to take a look at is some of the strong points that were made. And Elizabeth Warren really, as I said, she came out against Michael Bloomberg, but she also had some attacks for Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar, and she basically lumped the two of them as the moderates. Now, folks, I don't have a dog in this fight, but you know, I want to hear what their rationale is on what they're trying to push and promote as their policies. And she attacked them from saying that here's our moderate wing, and the healthcare issue is where she tried to attack them. And she talked about Pete Buttigieg having a small page of a PowerPoint talking about healthcare issues, and she threw in to Amy Klobuchar, all she had was just a small post-it note that you had to put in information about her plan. So that was her initial attack for those two. And Pete wasn't shaken, and Amy had a very good answer. Mayor Pete says, well, I'm not this spreadsheet guy. I'm a Microsoft spreadsheet. And Amy Klobuchar basically came back and says, well, post-it notes were created in her home state in Minnesota. So they kind of laughed that off, but we could see where Elizabeth Warren was really on the attack, and she had abandoned her whole strategy coming into that. She was all over the place, and she tried to explain her own healthcare plan about 2 months ago, and as soon as she started to explain it, she lost support because people looked at it and says it doesn't make sense, and who's going to pay for all this? So, but she came back and she used that to attack those two. Mayor Buttigieg, I felt, had a strong outing Wednesday night on that debate stage, and I just want to highlight one area. And basically, he was talking regarding, as they all were shooting daggers at Michael Bloomberg, but he also had Pete Buttigieg was sparring with Bernie Sanders. And this is one of, I think the highlight of the night was this. Mayor Pete says, when they were going back between Bernie Sanders and Mayor Pete. But he said, basically, people, we need to wake up here. We have two of the most polarizing people on this stage, and he was referring to Michael Bloomberg and Bernie Sanders. And he says, one, we have a socialist who thinks capitalism is the root of all evil, and a billionaire who thinks money is the root of all power. And he went on to elaborate and say this isn't where this isn't where the voters are looking to go. And he kind of hesitated, and Mayor Pete says, now think about this. We have people that are striving to get your vote, and realize, folks, that we have these polarizing figures, and they're not even Democrats. And there was a lot of applause from the audience, and even those that were on the stage. I saw old Uncle Joe. He had to chuckle at that too. That here we've got Bernie Sanders, a socialist, running a primary independent, and Bloomberg, who's been independent, Democrat, Republican, so he can't even make up his mind. So Mayor Pete had, I felt, a strong performance. So let me just take a step back and say, who did I think were the winners? Elizabeth Warren did very well, and Pete Buttigieg, I would say, had a very strong night. Losers, Mayor Bloomberg all the way, and he took a real slide coming in. His primary debut on stage, and it was a dud. Amy Klobuchar had some issues with Chuck Todd and a Telemundo reporter who were specifically looking to put their finger on the scale. And Chuck Todd attacked her when she was a prosecutor with a case that what I found really kind of a low situation, or low blow from Chuck Todd is on his show on Sunday, Face the Nation, or Meet the Press, he talked and discussed and put her on the notice and to talk about that particular issue, and he brought it right back up again. And she explained herself then, and she explained herself at this time too, that it went through a grand jury, and a grand jury looked at the evidence there, and they made a decision. But Chuck Todd was really, I think, just looking it for a hit. And Telemundo's basically attacked Amy Klobuchar because she didn't happen to know at the time who the president of Mexico was, and she couldn't name him, and they attacked her on that. But I thought that substantively that Amy Klobuchar held her own. And now she went in with momentum, and I think that, I'm not sure if she gained any more momentum, but she didn't really, in my eyes, and what I heard from her, she stayed status quo. So we'll see how the caucusing goes, if they get this right. I'm hearing rumblings that there may be some more glitches when it comes to tallying up the votes. But the other area that of attack from Elizabeth Warren against Mayor Michael Bloomberg, the ex-mayor of New York, was the stop and frisk. Now, folks, when you have an epidemic of murders like what Mayor Bloomberg was facing, and what they're facing right now in Chicago, and nobody has an answer, Michael Bloomberg went in and said, look, we have people on the streets carrying weapons, and we need to get those illegal guns out of people's hands. Hence, stop and frisk. We at least need to have the discussion that, black on black crime. But if you say that, you're called a racist by just trying to have the discussion on keeping citizens safe. Now, what Mayor tried to explain, and he wasn't, didn't get into details, and basically was apologizing for it. But he should have stood tall and said, look, we're about protecting our citizens. And when we had 700 citizens murdered on the streets of New York, we had to do something, and stop and frisk was effective. It went from 700 in a year to 300. Now, what can we do to make it better? But the ultimate priority is having people be able to walk in New York City without getting murdered. And he didn't push back and say, look, we need to have a discussion, and I'm thankful that we have 300 more individuals alive than murdered. But he didn't say that, and he tried to really, like most of the night, he didn't really have answers. And what I'm thinking, and what I've heard other talking heads say, was, look, you knew coming into this that it wasn't going to be, these questions should have been gone over. Didn't anyone go through debate prep? And I'm sure they did. But just like the politicians that we have nowadays, they know better than everyone else. And that's probably the attitude with Michael Bloomberg. And I see that with the politicians here in New York, the state of New York, Andy Cuomo, and the Democratic House and legislature right now. They have passed a bill because they know better than the residents about no bail. And what they've done is crimes like assaults, robberies, misdemeanors, negligent homicides. If they come before a judge, it doesn't even come before a judge. The officer hands them an appearance ticket, and they come back then. They don't even go before a judge so that the judge can determine whether or not this person is a danger to society. And this is the crammed down government that we are seeing right now in New York. And this was displayed by Michael Bloomberg in his attitude to think, all right, I'm just going to show up there and I know better than everyone else on the stage. And that was the attitude, I believe, that he took going into that debate. That he knows better than everyone else, and you don't need to tell him. He doesn't need any debate prep to discuss issues on that debate stage. I'd like to also talk a bit about President Trump this week, and folks, we've been here before. It seems to be baked into the cake that President Trump is going to be tweeting. But Bill Barr has been in President Trump's corner doing his job, trying to drain the swamp, and I just wish that President Trump would put the tweet down, or maybe even call William Barr in and say, hey, look, I'd like to talk to you about some issues right now. But what does he do? He goes on Twitter. And I think that what took place is, and I'm glad that Bill Barr responded in an interview and said, look, you're making my job almost impossible. And I'm glad that William Barr spoke up, because someone needs to push back on President Trump. Yes, he's president, but when you have people that have been loyal, that are moving your ball forward, you can't undercut him. But President Trump did make a statement that for President Trump, he didn't come right out and say it, but he everything he went right up to the line to say that Bill Barr was right, and that he needed to back off. One other situation that was in the news was Jesse Smollett. And I don't know if you know that name, but he was the Empire actor that made the accusation against these two MAGA hat wearing people that came up to him and beat him to a pulp, and he went to the press saying that it was a hate crime, and that that he was on the morning and evening news discussing that attack, only to find out that he was a false witness. It never happened. In fact, he hired the guys that were wearing those hats. And the prosecutor, Kim Foxx, basically brushed it off, and there were no charges against Smollett. And there was an outcry. People were looking and saying, wait a minute here, if this wasn't, here's a black person making an accusation of a hate crime, and it was all a lie. And people were all up in arms to say, see these Trump hat wearers, see the racists? Come to find out, Jesse was lying the whole time. So what do we have here? I think over the last month, they have re-indicted Jesse Smollett for false witness. I think bringing false witness. I think 6 counts, if I'm not mistaken. So he's not going to escape, and he definitely should be held accountable for for those accusations, and putting the Chicago police on notice. And he had some things to say, disparaging things against the police department too. So we'll see how this whole court proceedings take place, and if old Jesse spends some jail time for what he tried to attempt. And folks, I really, one other area that was in the news is this past Sunday we had President Trump make a first appearance for a president flying in to the Daytona 500, Air Force One coming in, making a big flyby, and having his motorcade going around the track. A lot of the NASCAR folks, they loved it. And it was good to see our president out there promoting one of America's greatest races. And I'd like to, and right after he pulled his motorcade off, they got, I think, 22 laps, and rain came in, and they canceled it till Monday. But right at the very last lap, a horrific crash that took place, and we had Ryan Newman was in the lead, and he got bumped in the back and spun, flipped over in the air, and hit head on. In fact, I think he was hit on the driver's side. Such a horrific sight to see, and you just wondered, would this be a fatality? Well, prayers went up, and that God would intervene. And looking at that, you knew that there was a struggle for survival in that crash. 2 days later, folks, Ryan Newman is walking out of the hospital, and I just say, answer to prayer. And it was just a good sight, a great sight, to see him walking out of the hospital with his 2 daughters in arms. So it's really a great ending to what could have been very tragic. And that's my perspective and comment.